Today we'll start to learn the Maimer Bereshit Bara that the Rebbe said on Motzei Shabbos Bereshit Tafshin Lamed Ches 1977, 40 years ago. As we mentioned when we learned the last Maimer, L'Havanin in Simchas Torah, after the Rebbe suffered a heart attack on the night of Shmini Atzeres in Tafshin Lamed Ches. On Motzei Simchas Torah, only 2 days later, the Rebbe told the doctor that he would very much like to speak to the Chassidim on a hookup, on a live hookup from his room. The doctor allowed him to speak for 5 minutes, and the Rebbe spoke for over half an hour. Later, the doctor asked the Rebbe, "Did you finish saying everything you have to say?" And the Rebbe said, "If I'll finish saying everything I have to say, then I'll never finish." The Maimer Bereshit was a few days later. This was Motzei Simchas Torah. A few days later was Shabbos, and Motzei Shabbos Bereshit, the Rebbe once again spoke from his room to the Chassidim on a live hookup. And this continued on a few weeks, as we'll see Be'ezras Hashem. Although the Maimer from Bereshit is not officially a hemshech, Hemshech means it's not officially a continuation to the Maimer of Simchas Torah, but in a certain sense the points are very similar. As we learned in the Maimer of Simchas Torah, the question that the Rebbe asked in the Maimer was, why is Simchas Torah celebrated by dancing with our feet rather than with understanding the Torah? In other words, why do we take it into a physical embodiment of taking a close Sefer Torah when the whole idea of Torah is seemingly a spiritual idea of understanding and comprehension? And this physical embodiment is something which is equal to everybody. And the other question is, why is Simchas Torah celebrated on Shmini Atzeres, or on the second day Yom Tov of Shmini Atzeres, rather than on Shavuos, the day that we received the Torah, which in a sense is the same question. Why don't we celebrate when the light of the Torah, the energy of the Torah came into the world? Why do we celebrate Shmini Atzeres, which isn't connected to that idea? And the answer to both is the same concept, that it's true that the spiritual essence of the Torah is the understanding, and it's revealed on Shavuos, but it's specifically on Simchas Torah that it's the oneness of every Jew, which is specifically expressed in the physicality, in the physical dancing, and that's something that doesn't just remain on Simchas Torah, but it comes and it permeates every single day, because in that there's no difference between one day and the next. Over there you can't differentiate between physical and spiritual, and therefore since you cannot differentiate, it doesn't remain limited to Simchas Torah. It takes through every single day of the year, so that even when a few weeks or months went by, you can still feel that you're being guided by the simcha, by the joy of Simchas Torah, and by the feeling of total strength and power one feels from the connection of the essence to the essence of Hashem. And this, we explained, is also something which is connected to that specific time, at that time, and now 40 years later, even more so, to the idea of a darkness, a spiritual darkness that one can give up, or one can feel despondent as a result of that spiritual darkness. But no, the Rebbe says there's nothing to feel despondent, because there's something deeper than darkness. There's something that's expressed even when you don't feel the light, which is the essential connection of a Jew to Hashem. In a similar fashion came a few days later the Sikha of Shabbos, the Maimer of Shabbos Bereshit, which in Shabbos Bereshit, in a sense, it's even more further away than Simchas Torah. On Simchas Torah, and in all of these Mamorim, the Rebbe is explaining the idea of V'Yakov Halach L'Darkei. V'Yakov Halach L'Darkei is 3 words that express Yaakov Avinu, who's leaving Bereshit. He's on his way to Charan. He's on his way to Charan Af Shalmakim Ba'elam. He's on his way to a place where he's going out of Eretz Yisrael, out of the holiness of Eretz Yisrael, out of the spirituality that's connected to his father Yitzchak and his grandfather Avram, out of the holiness that's connected to Eretz Yisrael, and he's going to Charan, to a place of Charei Nafshel Makim, a place of the anger of Hashem, a place where spirituality is not felt, and on the contrary, he's dealing with his uncle Lavan. And yet, he goes in a joyful manner. Vayisa Yaakov Raglov, Yaakov lifted his feet, and like Rashi says, Mishin is Baser, Psura Toiva. Once Yaakov was given the good news, then Nase Ragloi Kaloleches, his feet were easy to go. Now in a similar fashion, although in a different situation, but the same concept is the Yaakov Halach L'Darkei. When Yaakov goes on his way, Yaakov goes on his way and he travels on his way, on his path. He leaves wherever he's been earlier and he's now traveling on his path, on his own way. And in a similar manner is Yaakov Halach L'Darkei after Simchas Torah, after Tishrei, after the holidays and the spiritual upliftment that comes from the holidays. Then comes the main avodah, the main work that a Jew has, which is Halach L'Darkei, to actually go on our way, to go into the world. Now in Matzei Simchas Torah, there's V'Yaakov Halach L'Darkei. But the V'Yaakov Halach L'Darkei and Matzei Simchas Torah is one which is, you're still coming from the power of Simchas Torah, and the Halach L'Darkei is that rather than being connected fully with the oneness of Simchas Torah, we're now going L'Darkei to our path in the world, but we're still in Parshas Bereshit. We're still before Shabbos Bereshit. We're still during the last week of Tishrei. Whereas the V'Yaakov Halach L'Darkei Matzei Shabbos Bereshit is on Bereshit. A person felt the creation of the world. How the creation of the world from Hashem, he still felt the connection to the Simchas Torah, to the holidays of Tishrei. Matzei Shabbos Bereshit, we're going into Parshas Noach. We're going into the week of the flood. We're going into, like it says in Yom Yom, a week which is not such a happy week, because the entire week we're dealing with the sins of the people in the generation of Noach. Only in the end of the week do we get to meet Avraham Avinu. We're going in a week which leads us to Cheshvan. It leads us out of Tishrei. It leads us into the Mar Cheshvan, the darkness of the world. That V'Yaakov Halach L'Darkei is an even more complicated one. So if on Matzei Simchas Torah we ask the question, how can we go on our way? How can we leave a situation where seemingly it should be the understanding and the spiritual upliftment, and yet we're going to the darkness where we don't feel that? And the answer is because of our deep connection to Hashem. On Shabbos Bereshit, the question is even stronger. And this is where the Rebbe starts the Maimer. The Pasuk says, Bereshit Bara Likim Es HaShamayim V'Saaretz. Immediately on the words, Bereshit, the beginning, Hashem created the heaven and earth. Rashi immediately brings a question. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak says, L'hoya tzarich lahaskil es ha-Torah. The Torah should not have began other than with the words, Achodesh hazeh lochem reish chadashim. And the words, L'hoya tzarich lahaskil es ha-Torah, are very powerful words, which means that in a sense it's not just a question, why don't we start, but it's a very powerful question that it seems like there is no option to start the Torah with anything other than Achodesh hazeh lochem. Umat tam pasach beBereshit, says Rashi. What's the reason that the Torah instead begins with Bereshit? Because koyach ma'asav higid le'amai. Lasis lahem nachas goyim. Hashem wanted to tell his nation the power of his deeds in order to give them the inheritance of the nations. So that if the nations of the world come to the Jewish people and they say to them, you're robbers because you stole the land of the 7 nations. And the Jewish people say to them, the entire world belongs to Hashem. Bereshit bara likim. Hashem created the world. He created it and decided who he wants to give it to. When he wanted to, he gave it to them. And when he wanted to, he took it from them and he gave it to us. Now seemingly, although we don't ask this clearly in the Maimer, but the questions that are here is that Achodesh hazeh lochem if the Torah started with Hachodesh Hazeh Lachem and later said Bereshit, would we not be able to tell the nations anyway this concept? Why do we need to start the Torah with Bereshit in order to be able to let the nations of the world know that Hashem created the world? It just has to be mentioned somewhere in the Torah. And also, what's the point of B'tzoyno Nisana Lahem? The whole question is, how did you take the land away from us? And the answer should be, because the land belongs to Hashem, and Hashem decides who should have it. When He wants to give it, He gives it to us. What's the point of saying that when He wanted to, He gave it to them, when He wanted to, He took it away from them and gave it to us? Just say clearly, the land belongs to Hashem, and it's up to Him to decide who should get it. Now the Rebbe brings here a very interesting point, that according to Chassidus, the reason why the Torah should have started with Hachodesh Hazeh Lachem is because Hachodesh Hazeh, the word Hachodesh, refers to the Sfira, the attribute, the godly attribute of Malchus, of kingship, which is the attribute which is responsible for the godly power that creates the world. The word Hazeh refers to the godly attributes of Zeir Ampin, which is the Sfiras, the attributes of godliness, the godly energy that's above the world. The whole purpose of creation, and more than that, the whole purpose of giving the Torah is to be able to draw down the spiritual energy of Hazeh into the physical world of Hachodesh, into the physical world. And that's why the Torah should have begun with Hachodesh Hazeh. What does it mean the Torah should have begun with Hachodesh Hazeh? That's what the Torah is all about. The Torah was given to us, the word of Hashem, this great, the knowledge, the wisdom of Hashem, and its whole purpose is in order that we should draw down into the world the spirituality of Hazeh. Instead, the Torah starts with Bereshit. And the question isn't just why we start with Bereshit and not with Hachodesh Hazeh. The question is that Bereshit seems to be the total opposite of what the whole point of the Torah is. Bereshit is with the letter Beis. In the beginning, the creation. Bara Likim, the creation. The creation of the world is a creation that comes after a tzimtzum. After Hashem contracted the godly light and moved it away to the side, and then condensed that light in order to create a world in the empty space, so to speak, that was formed by moving the light aside. That's a world which is created in a manner where godliness is hidden, is concealed. And the question is, the whole point of the Torah is to bring revelation of spirituality into the world. Instead, what do we start the Torah with? Bereshit, with a creation that comes after a tzimtzum, with an empty space, with a vacuum where godliness is hidden. Why do we start the Torah by talking about the concealment of godliness? That's the world. The Torah is about bringing godliness into the world. And so therefore the question, in essence, is, why are we starting in a similar question, but in an even more powerful way than the question of Simchas Torah? The question of Simchas Torah was, why do we not learn Torah? Why do we take a close Sefer Torah? So that's in the spiritual energy that we have. We can either do it in a spiritual way, which seemingly is what Torah is all about, and instead we're doing it in a way of the actual Torah itself. Here the question is even more powerful. Torah is about bringing godliness into the world. Instead of starting Torah with something which talks about bringing the godliness into the world, we rather start with the darkness, with the tzimtzum, with the contraction, with the darkness. That's the opposite of what Torah is all about. That's the question, and we're going to stop here and continue, Mr. Hashem, tomorrow with the continuation of the Maimer.